thank you for joining us. This is Jerry Samuels with Think Different Omaha podcast. And as I'd alluded to in some of my my advertisements, my flyers, and circulars, we're gonna have a discussion with the theme of where do we go from here. So we've seen that there's been a number of very high-profile, unfortunate incidents involving African American men, and it brings back up these wounds of racial injustice, racial inequality. And we know that the American people, they're frustrated, they're hurt, they're angry, and I think people want to know what to do. So I wanted to be able to bring together members from the faith community for this particular reason. We saw the civil rights movement of the 60s was championed largely by members of the Black community and members of the faith community. And I haven't heard a lot of rhetoric around what the faith community thinks about this and what they're actually doing to be able to move forward in reconciliation, move forward in seeking that justice and getting that justice. So I have with us today our guests, Pastor Myron Pierce, I have Pastor Femi Awodele, and I have Mr. Todd Shannon with us. So gentlemen, if you would just like to take a few moments and just tell our viewers a little bit about yourselves. Todd, we can start with you. Yes, absolutely.
All right. So my name is Todd Shannon, like Jerry just mentioned. I'm originally from South Carolina. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but grew up in South Carolina I moved to South Carolina when I was 10. Grew up, single parent home, probably a scenario far too common in our community. Section 8 housing, dad wasn't around. But ended up being able to, my mom was a woman of faith. She passed that faith on to us, me and my brother and my sister. And for me personally, I was able to earn a basketball scholarship, able to go to school. And, for me, it was that faith and those opportunities that allowed us to kind of come out of that situation and put me in a situation where now I'm, I feel like I'm doing well in the faith. I have a wife and 3 kids that I'm very proud of. And so I have a perspective of having been on that side of the scenario where a lot of our young Black kids are in, right? Growing up in situations that are not ideal, but still coming out of that with some victory. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. And so hopefully I can bring that perspective to the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Femi Awodele. I am originally from Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria, and I came to the US 28 plus years ago. I'm actually not a pastor, I know. Jerry called me a pastor, but I'm in ministry, I'm in full-time ministry, and I've done different form of ministry. But right now I'm an itinerant guy. I travel a lot, over 50 countries speaking, and I have been blessed. There was a time in my life that I got involved in policy, and you can do policy without politics, so trying to bring change. And now I try to bring change in a different way. I'm sure we'll get into that. I have done ministry a long time. I'm married 28 years. I have 2 kids, one adopted daughter who is currently rebelling, but I know she's going to come back home. What else? I am so blessed that everyone on this panel, including Jerry, I have known for at least 10 years. So that is a blessing for me.
Thank you, Femi. Thank you.
Yeah. I know Femi and I go kind of way back. 2002, I was facing a lot of time in the penitentiary. And Femi would come in and minister the word. And so very, very beautiful to be here. I'm from Omaha, North Omaha, and born and raised. Did a lot of time in the penitentiary, gangbang, dope dealer. But got captured by the gospel, man.
That's awesome.
Here we are years later, pastor in North Omaha, still married, 5 kids, just actively involved in the community. And I wanted to see the church really lead the conversation, not just lead the conversation, but lead with action.
Absolutely.
I think we have a rich history of churches that were active in pursuing justice. And so I think we stand on the shoulders of those giants, and that we owe it to our community to continue those endeavors.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for contributing. I want to get into our first question for tonight. Todd, you are by trade, you're involved in data analytics, but you're also a very active social commentator. You have a pretty substantial following online. You've been involved in some recent talks about in Omaha public schools and being able to get the high school athletics back on track. So you're staying out there a lot, and you're making your thoughts known, and people are really responding to that. So in regards to what we've seen happen in this recent season, with what's happened with George Floyd, with James Scurlock, now with Jacob Blake, what impact has this made on you, this social unrest? What has this done for you personally? What kind of impact has that made?
Yeah, so being having something to say is not. Sometimes people welcome your perspective, and sometimes not. I can say that it hasn't affected my world directly in the sense that that I have any particular benefits or detriments that has happened to me personally, but it's obviously impacted some of the folks and the relationships that I have and the conversations that I've had with those people, and it's difficult conversations. I think for me personally, I have grown in a sense of learning, try to learn the balance of between listening and giving my perspective, and trying to figure out an effective way to communicate my message. A lot of times, I just frankly, I make a lot of mistakes. There's some things some interactions that sometimes I wish I could take back, or what I wish had gone slightly differently. But it doesn't necessarily mean that those interactions was not productive or fruitful, because you learn from them. And for me personally, it's really just been about trying to really hone the way I engage these topics, because they're very, very important to me. I was telling a friend of mine, a guy that I played basketball with, we had a conversation for about an hour and a half the other night. And, oftentimes he would say to me, "Hey, I don't like, sometimes how you say things or what have you." What I said to him is that I'm not always going to be perfect in the way I say it, but that doesn't mean that I'm wrong, right? And as far as my perspective, so just trying to get that, keep that conversation going, and making sure that I'm staying focused on what's important with these conversations, because it's not about like being right. It's about helping people, removing obstacles and barriers to people's flourishing, and really removing obstacles and barriers for people, hearing the gospel. I think that that's kind of my objective, even if that's not my impact all the time, right? I think we have to allow for each other to make mistakes, and you have to give that grace as well as you receive it. So That's how it's affected me personally.
Thank you. And how about you, Femi? What have you been thinking? What's been going on in your mind with all of this?
I am one person that wants to see things from the biblical standpoint. Everything in my life I see from biblical. I try to see from what are the principles, what are the things in the Bible about this. There are two evils. In this world, there is evil and there's good. Evil is from the pit of hell, from darkness, and good is God. God is personified in good. Like I said, I was born and raised in Africa. I have visited 50 countries. There are more countries I know more. In Nepal, I am considered a Taru because I'm so familiar with the people. And so I've seen everywhere I've been evil. Evil from black to black, white to white, and the world is littered with evil from the wickedness in the heart of men. And I believe that we can change evil in two ways. We can change evils with law, but like Paul told the Romans, the law only show you what you have done wrong.
Right.
It does not have the ability to transform you. Romans 7. So we can change rules with laws. We can change evil with laws so that you don't hinder the other person. But the best way to change evil is to change the heart of man. Is to change the heart of man. And that is a longer process. That is what the church should do. What the generation of Martin Luther King did, and they did very well, was they attacked both. They did it from the law, to change the law, and they were successful in getting both political parties, primarily the Republican actually, to change the law. And eventually they changed the law, but they changed it with non-violence. Couple of years ago, I was blessed, actually 2 years ago, I was blessed to go to Worms. Worms is the city in Germany where Martin Luther, the original Martin Luther, was hidden from the Catholic Church, and also where he died and buried. Many people probably don't know about the original Martin Luther. They know Reverend Martin Luther King, but the Martin Luther who in 1517 rebelled against the Catholic Church. A lot of people thought he actually left the Catholic Church. No, he didn't. He wrote the 1990s, some say 95, some say 99, and it caused turmoil against the Catholic Church, but he stayed. He told people, my goal is to bring change within the Catholic Church, not to cause division. And he died a Catholic, even though many people left the Catholic Church because of him, and he did it in a peaceful way, to the point that Catholic Germans protected him. He's probably one of the only people that was not killed in that era. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is, the way we are fighting, there is justice of God, and when we human beings start to take things in our own hand and do it in our own way, then for me it becomes doing it in your own way. I will end by saying this. Gamaliel is a Pharisee, and Gamaliel was a God-fearing Pharisee, unlike the other ones. And when the Sanhedrin Council arrested Paul, Silas, and all these people, and they were going to beat them and kill them and do all these things, Gamaliel said, guys, I got to talk to you guys. If these people are liars like everybody else before them, they will fail. We've seen many people come and fail. But if these people are from God, then if we fight them, we will be fighting God, not them. So my advice is, let's leave them like we've left the other ones, and then, hey, 2,000 years later, here we are. Christianity is majority. So what I'm saying is, there's a way to bring about justice in a godly fashion, and we've seen it throughout history. And I don't believe the current way that we're doing it is the right way to do it, and I'm sure we'll get to that later.
Thank you for contributing. Myron, how have you been feeling with all of this? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think growing up in the hood and seeing how the American narrative has by and largely affected even the way that young African Americans grow up in our community, it's left me pissed off, actually, and angry, and all the stages of grief. Let me put it like that.
Right.
I think it's the stages of grief that a lot of us are going through. And I think, number one, being able to to be aware that it's a lot of times when I'm having conversation about racial injustice, issues of equality, sometimes I hear white folks say, well, you seem so angry. And I think the way that we need to frame the conversation, at least is how they think it is. When you see anger, think grief.
Mhm.
And when you think grief, look at the larger context of trauma and the role trauma has played in decisions that I've made and many of people, many Black Americans. And so I think I'm grieving, and sometimes you feel hopeless. Sometimes I felt hopeless in terms of, this country is X amount of years old, and yeah, we've made some progress, but I don't feel like it's been sufficient enough to see all people considered equal, just not from a law standpoint, like Brother Femi said, but from a place of genuine transformation that, hey, I see you as equal. And so I think that's been the challenge, as well as leading a diverse church and having to have conversation and discussion so that we, like Paul said in Ephesians, can see that middle wall of partition has actually been destroyed and that we've been made one. And so the process of that is tiresome. And yeah, it's the ministry of reconciliation that we're called to.
Absolutely. Awesome. So going back to kind of what I was saying as far as who's really like authoring the movement, at least who's being presented to us as authoring this new age civil rights movement. We're looking at the Black Lives Matter organization. Do you feel like or do you believe that they speak for Black America as a whole, for African Americans? Is that what are your thoughts around that? Because we sometimes we get into this confusing situation. I've seen conversations. I've been part of conversations where, people do not disagree that Black Lives Matter, but they are hesitant to use that terminology because of the presuppositions that come with it, right? So, what are your thoughts about the Black Lives Matter movement? What do you think that they are doing well? What are things that you feel like should be augmented or should be changed or anything like that? What are your thoughts around that? Anybody can go ahead.
Okay, so okay, let's open it up. So I think the church is complicit in our timing. And what I mean by that is when the Wright brothers set out to say, hey, we think we can build something to get from A to B a lot quicker, a lot faster. It's called their plane. Or it was actually the Christians who said, if God wanted man to fly, he would have given wings. Right? And so the point I'm making is it takes the church, it seems like, so long to take the lead in what God wants us to do. And I think the whole idea of Black Lives Matter, regardless of how political it is, I feel it's more prophetic. And it's prophetic in that the church, we should have been saying, hey, the lives of Black people in our country matter because we're the image of God. We're created in the image of God. And yet we really allowed it, we actually passed the ball to a handful of people who, whether they're Christ followers or not, I don't know, but have by and largely made it into a political organization that stands for a set of tenets and values. But I think inherently that prophetic word that Black Lives Matter, it's just that. I think it's prophetic. I've seen churches, particularly white churches, come out and say, hey, we don't agree with the Black Lives Matter as an organization and all of its political affiliations, but we do think that Black Lives Matter. And I sit back and I think about that, and my only critique of that statement is we are again playing defense and talking about what we're against and what we're and what we disagree with versus championing a gospel of hope of like, hey, this is what the church is for, and this is how Jesus sees all people. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so
absolutely.
I struggle with churches critiquing what they're against when before that we didn't know what they were for.
Wow, I might have to go down a rabbit trail a little bit because I want to add a follow-up question to that, but I want to hear what you have to say, Femi, what you have to say, Todd. So you guys go ahead, and I'm gonna throw something else in there. It's not no gotchas, but I just want to throw something else in there. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think that for me, I do want to say I think there is legitimate reason to have pause about Black Lives Matter as an organization, as a Christ follower, right? When you look at their espoused objectives and beliefs, and, if you just read them from their website, it just, like many of those things, it just don't have anything to do in any real sense with the flourishing of Black people. So I think that that's important. When you talk about wanting to break down the nuclear family, I think that anyone should have pause about that. But I think that it's interesting. Pastor Myra mentioned about playing defense, and I think that it's important. That's I think an important point to try to wrestle with, is that was it the fact that Black Lives Matter shed light on something that the church was ignoring? So I think that that's an interesting question to try to answer. I personally don't believe that it was, and let me tell you why.
You don't think that it was what?
I don't think that they did shed light on something that the church was ignoring. In other words, I don't think they illuminated something where the church was over here sleeping and like Black lives were being destroyed all over the place. I personally don't believe that, and I think that.
Go ahead. Saying that, are you asserting that the church hasn't ignored this? They've been proactive in this. Is that what you're asserting? Saying that?
I would say that in so much as I think that I do think the bulk of the work was done. A lot of the work was done as far as the church could take it, in a sense, from getting the law changed, the civil rights movement. I think that a lot of the legwork was done there. Right. And the church was the tip of the spear on that. And if you think about it, it was the church who led it, and then people got behind us, right? I think that as a matter of principle, we should be leery jumping on the coattails of movements that we didn't start. I just think that we should think very carefully. Because this is what the Bible says. The Bible says, and I believe it's in Proverbs, it says, the wicked do not understand justice, but the righteous understand it perfectly. If that's true, right, then when we are talking about the very concept of justice, right, how is it possible that those who emphatically reject the God that we love and believe in, how is it that they understand it better than we do? Now, that doesn't mean that there can't be concurrent and overlapping things. Sometimes man says what God says, and those things tend to overlap. But I think that we should be very careful about jumping on the bandwagon when there are those who basically say they reject our God, but they understand justice. I would be leery about that.
There is, first of all, let me say this: nothing can separate us from the love of God.
Mm-hmm.
Not death, not life, not anything. And I said that to say that as I disagree with my brother here, Myra, I love him dearly. He knows that. I don't think I need to say that. Just like I love all the other brothers here. But I disagree on the issue of the Black Lives Matter movement. Let me explain. Black Lives Matter movement. By the way, they changed their website this week. So
Did they?
They did. They
Oh.
did because, everybody was focusing on what they had before, which was Marxist, against the family and all that. So they scrubbed it. They gave it a good facelift this week. I do not support what they stand for philosophically, nor do I stand for them as an organization. It does not mean that Black life does not matter. From a what we're trying to change standpoint, Reverend Martin Luther King did not say Black life matters, but he stood for righteousness. And he didn't intimidate people, so people joined him. White, black, pink, yellow, everybody joined him because he said, this is my cause. Let's fight for this cause. And he did not intimidate people that if you didn't join us. He said, hey, you're not going to keep quiet. Okay? Join us. This is a cause. This is a cause that the Bible will follow. Now, in talking about the church, and I will come back to the issue that we're dealing with, because this is not a matter of either or. Okay. Now, about 18 years ago, I don't know, and many people watching this will probably correct my timing. There was a newspaper article, 44 deaths in 44 days. Omaha, remember that? Some of you remember that? And in North Omaha, gang activity, every day shooting. And Omaha World Era carried this thing, 44 days. And God used a young man called Willie Barney. And many of us, kind of said, this is nonsense. This is enough. And we all started to come out of the woodworks to say, let's do something. And that is where Empower Omaha came from. I was part of the leadership of the faith side of it. We met repeatedly, continuously, and all those things. That was the church. We did not need a secular movement. That was every single one of us, with the exception of maybe one or two people. And even those one or two people went to church. So that was the church coming out. That was the church taking leadership. And we put together a lot of things. Now, I'm not part of it anymore. The organization, in my opinion, have shifted to economics, not the other things that I think is important, which is the family. However, that is the church. Now, we need to realize one thing. There is the role of the church, in my opinion. Everything God creates, there's a purpose to it. It will be useless for you to have a Tesla and you use it to carry wood. You better go buy F-150. Then you carry your wood with F-150. You buy a Tesla, go have fun with it. Now, the role of the church is to change the mind. To change the mind. Has the church been good in discipleship, in mind changing? I will say no. I think I agree with Myron there that a lot of churches today were focusing more on attraction and a lot of other things other than discipleship. I think the church could do better because a changed mind is a changed person. As the church influenced people on policy, the way I got involved was I did a counseling for a couple many years ago, almost 20 years now, or over 20 years. I did a counseling for a couple and they ended up divorcing, and I said, who wrote these stupid laws? And that question got me to be fighting in the unicameral. It got me to be on the board of Nebraska Family Council and then Alliance for over 10 years. I mean, I knew every senator. And I was a judge. And what I wanted was to make sure there is a law that makes sure our family is intact. So we need to understand that when we say the church in terms of policy, laws, this is the church. We are the church. And we should do it the way Dr. Martin Luther King did it. We should do it the way Professor Martin Luther did it, which is peaceful. We don't need an organization who is telling us their aim is to eliminate the nuclear family. That their aim is to do this. What we need is, we are the church. Let us seek to change laws. Okay, this week, maybe I shouldn't be sharing this. This week, I have been invited to meet on what can be done in terms of police reform. And I'm going to be at that meeting. But because everybody there said, I have said to people, I am not against police reform. I have many police friends at the top, at the bottom, whatever. They're my friends. I meet with them. I talk to them all the time. They admit that there has to be reform. We can see that. LeBron James can sit down with Jared. Even they might not like each other, they might not agree, but they can sit down and say, how can we change the law? That is how the what do they call it? Justice reform was done. Even if you don't have to like me, but let's sit down and change it. Let's talk about it. There are some things that we can fix, but we don't have to loot. We don't have to do all these things and say we want to eliminate. That is my That is my position on BLM. That is my position on the church. The main church, their goal is to go after the mindset. Romans 12 verses 1 and 2. Be ye transformed, therefore, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. The church should focus in on that. What are the prejudices that we all have? We all have prejudices. We all have prejudices. Go to India. Brahmins don't like Dalits. Dalits don't like I'm forgetting the other tribes now. The Taru people that I mentioned earlier, they were enslaved by their own people. And I'm talking 2006. 2006 was when they got their independence. They were bought out of slavery, not even given independence. They were bought out of slavery. And these are the same people in the same country. So what we're saying is there are things we can do to transform. We don't have to agree on the same thing, but we can at least sit down and say, well, this makes sense, this makes sense, let's agree on this, without the chaos, I think this is being used. So I'll keep quiet.
So it sounds like I want to go back to what Myron said, because what I'm hearing is that, having that foundation, being a person of faith, right? Not agreeing with all the tenets of the Black Lives Matter organization. But I'm also hearing what Myron was expressing earlier about this. There's this rift, because we go back to what we see was championed and what worked, and how people came behind the movement of Dr. Martin Luther King and that camp from half a century plus ago. But when we look right now, and let me say this: when I was downtown at the protests the day after James Scurlock died, in the night before, I could count on half a hand how many churches were present. So I think about that, and I think about what Pastor Myron is expressing, and the frustration that he's expressing. I think that shouldn't be remiss. Are we owning the fact that you can't be kind of proactive, right? Either you're moving in a direction with enough momentum where people can say that's proactivity, or that's reactivity. That's being defensive, and when you're constantly on the defensive, when you're constantly on your toes, you can't think about how to strategize, how to move forward.
Sure.
So do you think that the church now is being proactive with this issue?
Let me give a point of clarification. When you think about the historical Black church, has always been about the issue of justice in some way, form, or fashion. When it comes to economics, when it comes to voting, the very existence of the Black church is the fruit of segregation and slavery time, where you're not even able to worship together, right? So we know that's how we got the Black church. So to Femi's point, the church in North Omaha, a collective of leaders, have been on a journey towards justice, right? Different teams of people pursuing, from the faith covenant to justice reform. I think where the white church has been complicit is the point I'm making. That while we've been in the trenches wanting to shift mindsets, there's been such an incredible amount of silence and standing up for what the white church is against, but complicit in our silence when it comes to injustice. So that's the point that I'm making. And then the drift and rift in the chasm between the black church and the white church. And my contention is that until the world sees the way that we ought to love one another, how can the world actually follow after justice if it's not even happening between us? 35% Barna says of the white church believe there's a problem with racism and injustice, but 70% fail to act. And so for me, that's the point. You know what I mean? That,
I understand. So you're wanting to show that distinction, okay?
Yeah.
Excuse me, folks. Sorry.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. What do you expect the white church to do? What in a biblical Christianity standpoint, what will be the thing for the white church to do that they have not been doing? Because I'm not defending the white church. Okay, I probably know the pastors. You probably know them too. But what is it that they will be doing that they are not doing now?
That's a great question. I think even when you look at when the Christian moderates had told Martin Luther King, you need to just wait for justice, and he writes the letters from the Birmingham jail, and he said, "What do you mean you want me to wait?" And so I think for me, as I break down justice in stages, there's a person who's apathetic to justice. They're maybe, that's level one for me, or they're level two, they're audible, they're saying things that promote what the king would want have said. Number three, they're active, they're involved in some type of role in justice. Or four is, they're an advocate, they're actually in the trenches helping to bring reform, helping to shift. Or level five, they're actually allies. And so for me, I've seen the majority of the white church be apathetic, even in some doctrine, some denominations, because they see in their doctrine, they see race as a political issue, so they don't get involved, right? So for me, I think I want to see white churches go from level one to level five. I want to see them actually care about issues of injustice that are happening. I'm not saying that they don't care, but when we are in the middle of a pandemic plus injustice, I think it's contingent upon us to stand united. The other thing I think that white churches can do is I think they can evaluate their systems and structures that are helping to perpetuate injustice within their own tribe. So, for example, like if you're in a predominantly diverse community, then why is your board all white? Why is your leadership structure all white? Why is the assimilation of people into your church based on a Euro-American philosophy versus the kingdom? Again, I'm not knocking, but I'm just saying if you look at there's only like 8 to 10% of churches in America that are even diverse. So those are issues that I see that are holding us back as the church.
Yeah.
So if I could, Todd, would you?
If I could jump in. So a couple of things just with respect to the church being proactive. I think that it is important that the church not be reactive, in the sense that we are always on a mission of making disciples. It's not like we're not like, oh, this big social unrest is bubbling up and now we're going to get to work. Like that can't be our MO, right? But I do think, to piggyback off what Pastor Myra was saying, I think, you mentioned earlier, I'm a data scientist. I come at things I try to look at things as from an empirical standpoint. And one of the things that I've always scratched my head to try to understand, or try to have people help me understand, is that, a lot of the things that we talk about. Okay, so when we talk about justice, right, we use that term in the generic sense, but really what we're talking about is justice with a racial component, right? So we're not talking about justice in general. We're talking about specifically. So we're not talking about police brutality in general. We're talking about police brutality as motivated by racial prejudice, right? So one of the things that I've always struggled with about this presumption, right? That, okay, so it's one thing to say, well, churches are not responding to the injustice. I think it's important to ask the question, has it even been established that injustice is happening on that basis? Let's just take a concrete example. Obviously, the most recent scenario that kind of sparked this latest wave of unrest is George Floyd, right? Now, Officer Chauvin, what we know is that what he did was despicable. There was no dissent about that, right? Everyone looked at that and said, "What is that guy doing?" Right? Right? Almost universally. But what we have assumed, without even attempting to try to demonstrate, is that was racially motivated. This is an important question. How do we know that it was racially motivated? What is the basis of that? It's like, what has been good enough for us to say is to say, well, he was white, the officer was white, and the victim was black, therefore racism. And I think when I look at the Bible, for example, interestingly enough, you look in, I think it's in Corinthians, where it says these believers, they're having this legal dispute. Right, and they say, well, Paul says, you shouldn't be going to the magistrates to adjudicate that. Isn't there a wise person among you? What is this assumption there? The assumption there is that as the people of God, there should be somebody there who is wise enough and fair enough and just enough to make a ruling on that situation. Right? Right? That's the assumption. He said, don't you know that we'll judge angels? But how is it then that in these situations, no one is asking the question, why should we be assuming race as the motivation? Why isn't it enough to say, in Derek Chauvin's situation, he did something wrong? And now we're asking the church to respond to a racial injustice when it hasn't even been established that that's what actually took place. What we do know took place is that a cop did something very, very bad, and now he's being prosecuted for it. But we think differently, for example, about a guy by the name of Tony Temple, who is essentially the white version of George Floyd, and nobody even knows his name. The situations aren't just similar; they're identical. There was cops. If you Google Tony Temple, cops kneeled on the guy. They were sitting there. He stopped breathing. They kept kneeling on him. He died. He was actually dead when they were putting him on the stretcher, but they didn't know he was dead because the people just got there, and they were like cracking jokes. I mean, it's egregious if you watch it. But you see, it's not unreasonable to think, or at least think that it's possible that Mr. Chauvin did something that was incompetence, not racial animus. And I think somehow we feel differently about it, that it's not so much the result as what the motivation was. And we don't even think it's even necessary to establish that fact. And most of the cases that we end up talking about are along those lines. Like, how do we know that it was racial animus with respect to Jacob Blake? What is the basis of that? Right? We're making judgments about people we don't know. And that's one of the things the scriptures tell us specifically not to do. Like, we don't know people's motivations. The Bible, we can judge people's actions as right or wrong. So my point is that we need to try to establish an objective and empirical basis for saying this happened on the basis of race. And then I think the church can universally get behind it. But I think to your point, what that it devolves into is that there are certain political factions and people who are motivated by different things, and then we want to say, well, it's obviously motivated by race, and if you don't get behind that, then you're complicit. If you don't join in the chorus of this is racism.
So when
And I don't think that's fair.
And I think what you're saying is valid.
Yeah.
But it does it at least beg the question when you see that we have made up no more than about 13% of the United States population.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we see a disproportionately high amount of policing in African American communities throughout the country.
Sure.
So not even having to get into specific situations and try to objectively judge those.
Sure.
Just having a basic knowledge of statistics, one would be able to say that, wow, why are we seeing so much here? Why are we seeing such a high correlation between African American zip codes and police being in there and things going down that always seem to end really sour? Hey folks, it's Jerry here, Think Different. I want to thank you for watching our first premiere episode. Where do we go from here? Part 1. Wasn't planning on 2 parts, but we had so much meat that we were going through and things that we were just chopping it up on. I thought it'd be best for us to be able to kind of take this in doses and not just inundate everybody with just an overload of content. So you're going to be able to see part 2 next Thursday evening. Same time, same place, premiering on YouTube and on Facebook. So make sure that you come back, that you watch the wrap up of this discussion. It's going to be some good stuff, and also going to give some special shout outs to some folks. So make sure you stay tuned for that as well. And I'm just glad that you were here to really be a part of this journey with us. Feel free to let me know your thoughts, your feedback. Please be gentle. But I would love to be able to hear from you all, and I just hear what you think about the subject. So, this is something to try to be a catalyst to kind of get the conversation started, looking at how we can be actionable. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we are continuing to go through, and the people that I will be hosting a show with here for the next few episodes, because I am very purposeful, very intentional about who I'm trying to reach out to. I want to reach out to folks that I think really do a good job of pursuing positive impact. I think that's my main focus, because I want these things to be encouraging. I want you to be able to glean something awesome from them. So I say all that to say thank you, to keep watching, keep engaging, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.